Hey everyone, I think we are about to go live. I hope you can hear me. Do let me know in the chat. I'm gonna try to adjust the audio really quick before we go live, and let's see if we can get cracking. Ping me in the chat if you can hear everything, if you can see fine. If you need a drink, go get one. And we can then get started. Cool. All right, so let's slowly warm up and dive right into it. Thanks so much for joining. I hope you did check the part 1 of this live stream. And in a part 1, and why are we here, we covered this bit about becoming a bit more productive in UX design, almost like getting close to that mythical 10x of UX design, meaning top productivity, effectiveness, achievement, just, boosting your own potential. And it's everything to do with the tools, principles, performance tips, mindset, everything to do with the things which we don't really consider or read in like typical UX books. It's everything else about productivity. And that's why, let's say, when I mentor people, I always recommend them to, hey, don't just limit yourself with, someone who has done it already, someone from the past who already kind of made it in UX. I also consider all the other so-called gurus, but in a rightful way, someone who actually can give you some tips for improvements and take you on a journey of actually achieving just a little bit more as a UX designer. And so today, this is what we're going to talk about. It's going to be a part 2 of the previous live stream. And I prepped for you 10 additional tools. If you remember, we planned to do maybe 30, so I guess maybe there's going to be a part 3 or 4 to this. Do let me know in the comments if you like it, if anything resonates with you, and in the end of the stream we can actually agree, is it worth doing another live stream or not? So let's do some sort of user testing and desirability study of sorts where you can vote and tell me, hey, give us another live stream. Anyhow, I think there's a few of us already on a live stream, so let's crack on and dive right into it. If you've seen my previous previous live stream, you probably already know that it's very easygoing, it's conversational, so if you have any questions or anything resonates, do ping in the chat. Other than that, I'm just gonna give you and kind of like a download my thoughts on different things which in the past couple of decades improved the way I design things, the way I influence things, facilitate things, stakeholder manage, and do everything to do with the UX. And it's almost beyond the pixel pushing. It's more of like, a self-management, people's management, and general effectiveness. But let me just stop waffling. Let's get into the actual cool stuff. So, tool number 10, or actually 12, it's in no particular order. But every time I talk to, let's say, junior designers or midway designers or someone like a senior who's just getting, developing themselves and trying to become a master in a certain area of UX, I kind of understand and I kind of realize that not everybody is getting the most out of your time. The only currency we have in our lives, especially in UX design, is time. It's like how much time do you invest in things to progress them, to actually get something out of it. And one of the key, I guess, principles or recommendations I always give to junior designers is to stack their tasks or always try to do just a little bit extra in terms of preparing for projects. So in this specific example, I just comically put my own photos from my life. And let me start with this much more practical one. This is an example of one of the projects I did in UX a couple of years ago and then just years back as well. Basically, this illustrates of my approach before I start a project, where I stack my tasks before I even, let's say, engage with a client, before I even know what the actual project challenges are. If I just know, okay, this is going to be about, let's say, oil drilling, oil engineering, pipeline engineering, rigs and things of that nature, I'm going to go out of my way and find a podcast, I find a book I can read over a weekend, I find all the different courses, and I immerse myself into it. So I stack my free time with learning time and preparing and warming up for the project. That's one way to do that. That's just one example of how you can stack your time. And almost like as you go for a walk, you can listen to podcasts, prepare to do more in your UX job, let's say. So you prime yourself with a background information, with that secondary research, and you can actually achieve much more. Like, for example, a book like that, Day-to-Day Oil and Gas Trading and Shipping Delivery. You don't have to be in oil and gas or even know what it's about the trading. But if you can pick a book which tells you the day-to-day of your users, of your potential users or your customers, you can then prime it and have better discussions immediately. You can stakeholder manage better because your language immediately resonates with your users or stakeholder management language, sorry. And so this is an example. Another example, which is comical, of how I stack my tasks. And by the way, this is my walking desk, and I wanted to start on a lighter note. This photo I shared with my team because we had like a very funny activity where we just took random snaps in our houses at homes, and we had to tell a story. And my story was this, that every morning then I start replying to the emails, because let's face it, whoever you are, you're going to open your laptop as a UX designer and you're going to have hundreds of emails to reply to, right? So what I do, I jump on a treadmill for, let's say, 10-20 minutes. I reply and smash those emails out of a park. I have a physical activity. I have my, admin tasks like email replies. I already primed my mind for the day. I just get it out of the way. If you remember the previous tools in the part 1, I told you how to do, let's say, get things done, how to achieve more, how to do the one thing, things of that nature. Well, this is a warm-up. So I stack my tasks that way. I do some activity, I do some light thinking, I do some replies, and then I'm ready for the day to do everything else because I smashed that out of the park. I'm inbox 0 and I can go jump into it. This is a very simple example of how you could do that. Another way is, a lot of meetings you have, and what you can do with those meetings if you're overloaded, let's say, it's a random example, but one-to-ones. You could jump on a call and have a chat with your boss, or let's say your core team member, just having a walk, basically, literally a walk in a park, and just have that. So stacking the tasks and realizing where can you do, let's say, a couple of things at the same time, but not multitasking. That's a key distinction, because multitasking is, almost like it can derail all your focus, and you're just not going to get anything done if you try to get done at way too many things at a time. This is almost like a complementary task stacking, if that makes sense. If you, let's say, can stack your physical activity, a walk, which, let's say, it has been proven so many studies that 20 minutes of walking is the same as, let's say, me sipping on this cup of coffee in terms of activation of your brain and thoughts, and priming your body to actually become much more mentally active as well as physically. That to me immediately makes you a better performer altogether. So that's one. That's very, very simple thing. But just think about it in your life, let's say in your progression, in your career, in your work. Are there any tasks which you don't have to sit at a desk and just do like a drone, because they're quite low reward, like learning, let's say, you need to focus, but you can do a lot of learning or understanding or researching just by listening an audiobook and just going for a walk. Those couple of hours, an hour, 30 minutes is gonna be research time, which is a work time, but you basically now stack 2 tasks of physical activity and also, let's say, going for a walk and listening to an audiobook, and that immediately makes you a higher performer than someone who's just gonna sit, learn, and don't really activate your brain that much. So, just think of how you could stack it up. It's a simple, and a really, really effective example. I mean, it's almost like another bit, which is super specific, that example of just total immersion. If you're going to have a project in some sort of new field, make sure to immerse yourself. And you can stack it or you can just do it separately. But, every junior designer who are, let's say, just going to start with, I don't know, let's pick something crazy like live streaming for YouTubers and all content creators. I think 99% of the designers are gonna know shit, and pardon my language, gonna know nothing. I'm gonna beep it way too late, but they're gonna know nothing about it. So what can you do as a designer to prepare for that? Well, pick up a book, read about it, read articles, audiobooks, podcasts, things of that nature. Totally immerse yourself. That immediately gonna make you like out of a junior a senior, out of a senior a lead, because you're gonna know much more about the actual industry and all those whereabouts. Cool. All right, let's move on. Let's go to the next one. And let me just refresh my memory. And if it resonates, if you have anything in your mind about it, if kind of like you have any thoughts, do leave them in a chat. We can actually address your thoughts as well, or commentary or questions, whatever you might have. Next one, it's about keeping your mind present. And this is also going to be quite like an advice on, there's some tangible bits, some not so tangible bits. But this is an advice I give every single junior designer. And it's in particular in the growing designers, or someone who's a bit, let's say, quote unquote shy or timid, or a bit more on like introversion side. Let's say if we take a spectrum from introvert to extrovert. It's like, how do you perform your best when it comes to, let's say, public settings? There is a lot of, let's say, anxiety we socially face. There is a lot of other bits which are intrinsic, extrinsic. There is a lot of triggers. There is a lot of things we can take in and kind of reflect on, and that impacts our performance. Now, why I put this Jan's photo in it? As I mentioned before, learning about how to be a really good designer or top performing designer, you can learn from other designers, but there are just way too few of them. And to be entirely honest, designers are really good at designing, but not so much at, let's say, doing, like public speaking. There are just a handful of people who are really good at public speaking. Well, this gentleman is a comedian, and this is an example of where I was just listening to a random podcast, and he was talking about how he got into comedy. And comedy is like really challenging, craft. There is a lot of permeation from the comedy, and standing up and just facing your stakeholders and walking them through a workshop, through all the material. It's almost the same act as like a comedian would do, minus the humor, unless you're really good at that. But his take is that to be a top performer, for your mind to be switched on. And by the way, he's the one who has been very introverted, quite like, lacked confidence back in the day, but he figured out the way of how to engage the room, how to work with the room, how to deliver the message, how to influence, how to tell what the user research would tell, let's say, like random examples, but you get the drill. His take is that your mindset, or you, should be relaxed but focused, meaning it's almost like a dichotomy between being way too relaxed and being way too charged up, or being way too anxious. Like the best performance you're ever gonna get is somewhere in the middle. And you know what I'm talking about. At moments in your lifetime, not at all the time, but there has been moments where you felt in the moment, you felt in the flow, but in the social situations where you had it, everybody were just listening to you, whatever message you had all the influence in the world. And this person, this comedian, his name is Tom Segura, if you want to look it up. He's not a designer, by the way, but just in case you want to have a good laugh. But his take is that if you can figure out what's the recipe for you to be between relaxation and that charging and focus, and find that exact middle ground where you can put yourself in. For example, to me, before every workshop, which would kind of be, it's not a big deal once you do a lot of them, but for, let's say, juniors, seniors, someone who's growing into it, workshops and controlling a room and stakeholder management is going to be one of the biggest communication challenges. So how you can charge up and prep. Of course, there's going to be a lot of repetitions to create that present. There's going to be a lot of different bits you do, but what are they? Try to reflect, try to find exactly what puts you in that place. For example, for me, it's a cup of coffee before each workshop, and also preparation. And this is my suggestion to everyone, basically. If you want to be like a top performing designer, control a room, manage stakeholders like a pro, and get ahead, well, you must prepare. You must invent. Sorry, I just noticed a typo. sorry. You must prepare, you must plan, you must put in the work, you must put in the time. Let's say, as a designer, you don't really have to. You can do bare minimum and go for it, but you're not going to be effective. And so investing extra time, again, immersing yourself, preparing as much material, as much messaging, as much insights, digging deeper than necessary is going to prepare your mindset and is going to provide you psychological security. It's as simple as that. And from there, you're going to be relaxed but focused because you are going to know enough to actually contribute. A lot of designers, especially juniors, they kind of rock up to a workshop, let's say, or they rock up to a session, to a meeting, and they're kind of like, yeah, I'm here to push pixels, but nobody's, paying you to do that. They're paying for your expertise, for your actual deeper insights and knowledge and ability to influence. That's what UX is about. It's not that much about the actual deliverable. And so how can you achieve that psychological security? Is about knowing enough and being confident in what you know. And that only happens if you look deep and you actually dig into it. That then it results in a knock-on effect of presence, confidence. If you want to be like, if you're gonna, let's take example of me rocking to this live stream, talking to like 10 strangers online, right, at any given time. Like, how could I do that without preparation, without preparing this material? How could I achieve that calm but super focused state? It's only by preparing. That then gives me presence, gives me confidence. I can talk about the things which I have already prepared about, and I know which work, right? It's as simple as that. Just kind of try to deconstruct and see exactly how can you become that. But this is my recipe. It's a very, very simple recipe to deconstruct. It's a few steps, and that's about it. Now, just to preface, originally this slide and this tip or this principle was about how to push away the negative thoughts, how to deal with anxiety, how to do all those things. Because in reality, myself, I'm super anxious, super hyper in my mind. Like I'm going like crazy amount of miles an hour. How do you deal with things which you shouldn't focus at any given point? Let's say if you're in a workshop and your mind drifts somewhere, or you think about some sort of, I don't know, ego bullshit, let's say, which everybody thinks about. You have, let's say, clash of opinions, you have clash of insights. How do you deal with that? You could focus on that negative thought, on that thing, on that anxiety, whatever, and then it's just going to take you down the rabbit hole. You're not going to contribute at all. You're just going to stay quiet. Or you could kind of like address it and say, okay, this is right. That's great thought. It's probably coming from my ego. Let's just kind of push it slightly away. Meditation works brilliantly, but meditation works brilliantly day after or day before. It's not on an actual spot. The issue that we don't really know how to deal on the actual spot when we arise. Let's say you have a challenging conversation in a workshop. A product manager, or let's say a developer or a business stakeholder, might push back on your ideas and your thoughts on or how to do and deliver different bits. Well, this is almost like how you could address it, right? Like you could kind of like, you could just focus on that negative thing and let it carry you on, and you're not gonna arrive at anything. Or you could slightly push it away, just like how you would meditate. You wouldn't ignore it, you wouldn't shut it away, but you would kind of just be separating yourself. That's ultimately the trick. That try to be like, okay, this is ridiculous. Why am I even thinking about it? Because we need to solve X, Y, Z. It's not about me. It's not about them. It's not about interpersonal things. It's about arriving at some sort of outcomes. Well, let's dive into it, and then separating and slowly pushing it away and focusing and becoming much more present. So this is as simple as that. I have a few books on that. I should have included probably, but regardless, it's not rocket science. It's working with yourself. It's preparing for it. It's understanding what triggers you, what makes you much more performance. Relax but focus is super important. It's that the state of mind, which I might make a video on and might share like the specific things I use to get into that state, so that like, it's you actually your best self instead of just being yourself, if that makes sense. Cool. All right, and I see that resonates with a few of you on a stream. I'm really glad that it is so. I see a lot of people are joining quite late. Make sure to rewatch the first part. I'm gonna leave a timestamps if in the actual replay of this, so you can jump into it. And interesting comment. One time I spent 3 days planning, but when I walk in, all eyes on me. Everything slide. I can focus, but can't relax. Well, it's really, what do you think about? What are you actually thinking about on the actual spot? Think about those things, what you planned, what you prepared. Bring those up. Also, not everything is up to you. You can rock in a workshop and have, like, I don't know, the knowledge of, thousands of people, but if a person who is not with you in that workshop, maybe you should have talked to them before the workshop and kind of like gave them that information so they are primed to it. That's another trick, maybe, kind of like preparing doesn't mean just planning alone in isolation. It means considering what sort of knock-on effect is going to result in if you're going to have all the knowledge in the world and then kind of come into a workshop and nobody else knows about it. Well, then you're going to need to do a lot of work to kind of like download it, like give them that information and let them interpret and take them on a journey. That could take too long. That's probably not what workshop was about in the end, right? So it's also considering what else can you do. Cool. So are we talk about experience? How do you mean? This is a comment from Nicholas. And I see that relaxed and focused really resonated. That's cool. Right, let's crack on next, which is basically the thinking of a designer. And, well, not really a designer, any high performer, because you need to understand, human psychology. You need to understand what makes people tick. You need to understand what actually and how people think, really. Why do they react the way they react? What can you do about it? It's to do with the users, customers, your core team, business people, whatever they are, some sort of stakeholders, your spouse, your child, your cat probably as well thinks the same way. But Think Slow and Fast, but the actual book is Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman, is a must read for any designer, any product person, any engineer, techie. And that's because it gives a recipe of how people think based on a lot of different studies, and kind of puts them into two buckets. One is system 1, another one is system 2. And the system 2 is like the slower self. It's almost like the conscious, the effortful, super complex decision addressing system. It's super reliable, but it's on the things you know and consider, almost like from the knock-on effects, the chain reaction of different knowledge you acquire, that immersion. Let's say the system 2 would allow you to go deeper into all the different bits and then connect the dots. That's where that knowledge would come from, but that requires time. So the decisions you make, and sometimes you step back as a designer and you might think, oh, I have this insight and I want to synthesize this into some sort of themes. That could take you a lot of time to do, because you need to engage with system 2, which is much more conscious. It's not like intuition based. It's not something you can just snap your fingers and say, well, my gut feel says this. And that, as a segue, is about the system 1. System 1 is the decisions we make really fast. It's a decision, for example, if you saw a notification on a YouTube right now, which said, vaexperience just went live, join this. That probably decision to join or not join would be very fast and very intuition based, and based on if you liked my previous material, if you liked something else, maybe you have something else to do, maybe you want to procrastinate with my material, then you would immediately snap and join. That would be activating the system 1. So the decisions you or your users or any other human being or probably any other mammal does immediately and makes them like with a click of the fingers are system 1. The slow decisions are the system 2. Why does it matter so much? Well, it does that way because for example, if you are dealing with a user and you are doing user testing, user research effort, interviews, ethnographic research, and you're observing, and you ask them a question and their immediate answer is something like super snappy, yes, I do this every day, like as short as that probably came from system 1. Is this the real thing, or is it just intuition and like experience based that lacks context to me? Then you would probably be like, okay, maybe I need to dig deeper and follow up and give them a little bit of time. You know, maybe you need to give them time enough and just write an email before and say, this is what I want to talk to you about. Could you tell me about the decisions you make in that scenario before you engage with them? On the day when you arrive and talk to them, you can ask the same question, and chances are they're going to give you much more elaborate answer because, bam, they activated system 2. So what do you want to get out of that? What do you want to get out of, let's say, interactions with other human beings? What do you want to get out of yourself? Think about exactly what sort of information you want. And as you can see, the trick here is also that the system 1, the intuition, the quick answers we get in experience design is going to be about being error prone, because it's a snappy decision which is kind of from all the information you experience so far, but it doesn't have that connecting of the dots aspect. It's super automatic. It's everyday decisions, kind of like, oh, am I going to have a burger or a sausage? Or am I going to go for, I don't know, a coffee or a tea? Or am I just going to kind of like snap into it and join a live stream? Meanwhile, much more complex, reliable decisions, which are, you know, based on your grand memory and all the experiences you had or your users had, would be the systems too. It's super, super important framework. If you can understand, and it's almost like psychology 101, human psychology 101. If you can understand where the people stand, how do they make the decisions, what they say comes from. Like, for example, if I'm in a workshop and I'm in a very difficult person and they snap and just say, oh, I don't care about this, where does it come from? Where do you think that reaction came from? I can guarantee it's from system 1. Maybe there's a better way to interact with that person. Maybe it's a better follow-up. Maybe give them time to process it, come back to them and say, well, the user research says this, that's why we should probably do this. How about XYZ? How about we do this? What do you think about that? Give them time, give them space. Then they're going to engage system 2, give you a better answer. For example, when I deal with people in the team, in the different teams, or people I manage or people I mentor, you need to consider what do we need immediately, what do we need later on, how they're going to react to it, if it's going to be system 1 or system 2, what are they going to engage, where are they coming from immediately? Is it that intuition, or is it much more conscious and much more thought out decision? And that's why, if you know about it, you can forgive a lot of things, and you can then push the egos away. You cannot get inflamed. You don't have to get into arguments. You don't have to kind of like even think twice. You can just be like, okay, I understand that this is probably not what they actually mean. This is not what they actually are. Let's move on. Let's revisit it later on, or maybe approach in a different way. And this can be applied to any scenario where you deal with humans, or probably mammals as well. Maybe, you know, I don't know, your cat hisses at you immediately because they're coming from system 1, but if you give them food, they're probably much more nice and maybe, you know, lovely and so forth. This is super important though, but for that, make sure to pick up the book, because there's a lot of examples. I mean, ultimately, it's the framework which can transform the way you interact with other people and influence other people. Because let's face it, UX is all about human experiences and our users. Cool. All right, next one. This is a big one for the leadership. This is a big one for anyone who wants to get their life in order, who's maybe, I don't know, who's maybe get challenged with different things, who think that they're in too much of a reactive state, because as a UX designer or as any techie or any person, you're going to be overloaded with requests. You're going to be overloaded with emotions, with ego play, with random negative thoughts, anxiety, pressures from, you know, your surroundings, existential stuff, anything what kind of puts you aside and drags you out of that flow and optimal state to deliver different things and being influential and being effective designer, are basically what we're going to try to address with this principle, or this almost like a life lesson. So this is about stoicism. And Stoic philosophy is almost opposite on the modern day philosophy, which advises you to be super emotional, super open to being super reactive, that it's okay. In reality, it's again a dichotomy where you need to figure out what's a good ground between the two. You need to balance it out. But Stoicism in particular is great if you want to achieve things and you want to stay super focused, because its prime principle is to figure out yourself and kind of assess, okay, I'm having these challenges. Which of those challenges are in my control? Which are not in my control? As a designer, maybe you have a difficult client. Are you gonna be able to change their personality and maybe their disbelief in UX? Perhaps, but it could take you a long time. Maybe you have a boss who doesn't understand UX. Could you change them? Maybe, but again, it could take you a long time. But you could also tell if there's even a chance, if there is even a glimmer of, them being open to UX, let's say, to being led by a proper user-centered approach. Sometimes you're gonna have a lot of control and influence over it. Other times you have no chance whatsoever. Being able to recognize what's in your control and what's against your control is that prime Stoic principle, because then you can separate yourself from that bullshit. Oh, I hope that timed right. You can separate yourself from that type of nonsense, which keeps you away from being focused and effective, which keeps you away from actually going and getting after it. And so think about it. Think what's in your control and what's out of your control. In each situation, in each challenge you face, which sets you aside and kind of makes you stop, each obstacle, can you actually impact it? Can you actually address it right now? If not, why are you even bothered? Why would you even focus on it? Focus on something else you can actually control and something else you can actually influence. To an extent, it could be that you need to find a new job. To an extent, it could be that you're just going to need to stay put until you get a better project. To an extent, it could be that you're going to get a new client. To an extent, it could be that you're going to focus on a person who's going to be respectful of UX and what you want to achieve, but ignore everyone else. So there is a lot of consideration here, but this is a philosophy of life which can allow you to distinguish exactly what you can control and what you can't control. And trust me, if you actually do this, the life becomes so much easier as a UX designer, because you can focus on the 10x of improvement instead of focusing on all the different bullshit. And that's then kind of like elevates you, because your performance immediately gonna be top notch and much more assisting. And I see there's some stuff saying that it resonates, others not so much. That's totally fine. It's not for everyone. If you don't like it, you can stick around, or you can kind of come back to the playback, because I'm gonna leave the timestamps with specific topics. If you want to you actually want to reflect on it, you can come back. Anyhow, the next one is about making time. So this is super pragmatic and super tangible way to influence this, because if you think about it, and this is, by the way, a really good illustration by one of the designers who basically, I think in 2020, if I'm correct, just kind of drew it out of what the life of a designer, and it's all more of like a hands-on designer looks like. And as you can see, it's basically he's squished between those different blocks of the calendar, because there is just no time to do any work. And let me know in the comments if you have enough time to do any work these days. Probably a lot of you are still working remote. Probably a lot of you are still quite isolated from the teams. Probably a lot of you have to do a lot of catch-ups, one-to-ones, meetings, which could have been a chat, or it could have been just an email, but because people are so disconnected, they kind of block the time. And to be honest, my calendar looks way worse than what you see on a screen. I have maybe 6 or 3 or 2 meetings at any point overlapping, but that's totally fine. It's like, actually, what do you do with them? And my point here is what you can do and you must do is really take control of your calendar, because the worst thing you can do is actually think that this is out of your control. Again, trying to assess exactly if you can affect this, or is this happening for you, and to you, like, which one is it? because in reality, you can take control. For example, every teammate in my team right now, I did it myself, but I also recommend it. Block out the lunchtime regardless of anyone thinks and just set it to out of office. Immediately, probably it's not going to have a knock-on effect and not everybody's going to respect it. You might still get an invite into like a meeting, but over time, people are going to recognize and see that you're blocked out at that point. They're going to be much more respectful, and you can also tell them off. You can also say, hey, this time doesn't work because I have parental responsibilities, or I need to get lunch. I need to kind of like, relax a little bit and refresh and recharge. That's totally fine. But kind of taking control of your calendar. Like, for example, myself, if you see my calendar, I'm blocking it out to set the example first and foremost, and I don't always get to eat lunch. But that's fine by me. If it's not, make sure that you are actually much more diligent and much more strict with it. Another bit, which actually is super specific, is adding contingency time for the reactive motions. So even if you know it, if you have some sort of designs to produce or research to synthesize or crunch, you are gonna probably be running out of time because that block of 2 hours or 1 hour or 3 hours or half a day might not be enough for you. So what do you do then? Well, you can put a block of time. You can put out of office. You can tell your teammates that, hey, I'm not going to be available at that time. But another thing to do is also consider that to add extra time to each of different activities or to finish meetings earlier. But what works for me brilliantly and so many different people around me is to actually, let's say if you have a time block where you need to review the OKRs, the objectives and key results, add additional time to it. Add additional time to reflect and be reactive, because chances are you're going to need that extra minutes to do every other thing if you finish earlier, because finishing earlier is great. But you get my drill, what exactly I'm trying to say. Don't make, let's say if your week looks like this and all these green items are set for you, then you're not working for yourself. You're not working like you own it. Nothing is in your control. So make sure that you are setting your agenda. It's as simple as that. If you want to be a top performing UX designer, set your agenda, take ownership, do the hard work first and foremost, plan it and put it in a calendar, and then follow through with it and respect your time ultimately. Cool. What is it bad that I can't seem to ever use a calendar? It really depends. I mean, maybe you're like a solo, person who's freelancing and you don't need this calendar. That's totally fine. But I would recommend you to use a calendar if you have a lot of tasks and a lot of spinning plates, in any given moment. And let's see what else is there. So Cam is saying, hey, I'd probably hint for yes, mostly because XYZ, Parkinson's law, which is time boxing, which is a good principle to bring. Every task could take you 5 minutes. It could take you an hour. It could take you half a day if you want it. But you also need to then kind of go back and almost let's overlay this with a system too, because you need to reflect and see exactly if that time is enough based on your previous experience. How was it? Let's say if you're synthesizing a massive research study, which you need to inform some sort of actions in the design, it could be that, limiting yourself to 5 or 20 minutes is just bad idea. 1 hour or 2 hours could be medium, sort of like risky business. Maybe half a day would be like top notch. But if you put whole day, chances are most of it you could waste. Again, it really depends, but you get the drill, and it's a good call out, by the way, from the chat. And I can see that there's other bits trying to discuss the things. Cool. All right, let's see what we have next. I need to remember, by the way, these, because I prepared it last time, almost a month ago, and let me just have a quick sip. Cool. All right, so the next one is the winner's effect. This is actually by the actual based on an actual book by Ian Robertson, and he's spot on with this, by the way. This is almost like a framework or an idea, a mindset of how to allow yourself to accumulate success over time. And as someone put in the chat, I think it was Giancarlo, and he's saying, no, actually Camille saying progress is better than perfection. It's exactly that. It's like you need to focus on progress and accumulate success, that you are able to face bigger and bigger challenges as you go. Because if you are gonna just be kind of like David and Goliath scenario, but in a worse of settings, trying to be this kind of like a hero, jumping immediately for a biggest of a challenges, you're definitely gonna fail. Like I've seen a lot of designers who just get out of boot camps, they apply for lead UX roles because the companies don't know any better, and they burn out or they don't perform, and then it causes a lot of friction. I'm in the talks with a specific person who's really in that kind of bucket because they progress too fast. They took on too big of a challenges. They did pretty well, but they cannot do all the different bits which take years to master. Now they're almost like in a resume, they have several senior titles, but in reality they're, midweight, and they cannot even get a next job because they took on bigger challenges. It was a fluke. They were successful to get some bits, but kind of everything else got ignored, and then they sabotaged themselves against continuous success and evolution of your skills. And this is what this winner's effect is about. So winner's effect is about the snowball of the actual success, and facing the challenges. It basically states that to get to the biggest of the biggest challenge, to get and defeat the giant, let's say, whatever it is, it could be that your giant is to be a UX leader and set design maturity and influence big wigs and executives. That could be a massive undertaking if you just want to do in one session, right? But for someone who did it for 20 years and built themselves up and did just a little bit more frictionful, or what's a good word? The opposite of frictionless. If they faced more friction with each of the challenges they actually accomplished and won, they're going to be much more likely to succeed next time. So the book itself gives you plenty of examples of those things, but also gives you an examples of how you can actually fail as well. Because to each of the career ladders, to each of the winner paths or hero paths, there is a cliff. If you overreach, if you don't realize that perhaps you're already a massive winner and you cannot go any further in your vertical progression, going to the moon, you're going to bounce back and you're going to fail and burn. And there's just so many historical figures I don't even need to name, but super questionable historical figure in World War II. Who is he? He burned. He won a lot. He did a lot of bad decisions, but he succeeded winning, bam, burned. Good that it happened, but it's a prime example that you might reach a ceiling of bad decisions and winning in a not ethical ways which can backfire. Anyhow, for UX designers, this is super important because you're gonna start at zero. You're gonna need to build yourself up over the years and try to figure out and face the challenges which are right to address, which are at the right, almost like a dojo belt in your martial art of UX, if that makes sense. So being super self-aware, super reflective, and understanding exactly that perhaps you shouldn't just jump in and just, give your best self with a challenge you never ever done before is not a good idea. Super practical example on this. Let's say if you are not confident enough in your influence skills in terms of UX and driving the roadmaps and working with, let's say, product managers or whoever, well, try to shadow someone who is. Try to observe, try to learn from them, try to see exactly what they do. How do they win the discussions? How do they win together with other teammates? How do they manage to get done what you want to achieve? Shadow, observe, apply, test, iterate, reflect, you're golden. It's as simple as that. Then, once you're good, find the next challenge just slightly there. Try to reflect, try to shadow someone who's more experienced than you. It could be mentor, it could be more senior colleague, it could be anyone in a business, whoever can help you out. It's as simple as that, and that's what winner effect is ultimately about. Cool. All right. The next one is a super, super common thing, but it's also super, super powerful. it's starting with why. It almost doesn't matter who you are, what profession you have. Any success, if we follow from that winning topic previously, originates with deep understanding and then appropriate actions taken. You cannot deeply understand anything if you don't understand why you do what you do. So, for example, in UX, when someone comes to you and says, "Oh, we should do we have a wild idea, and you should design us an app, or you should research us some bits, and then propose some sort of solution," your immediate response should be why. It shouldn't be like how or what should we do, what do you have in mind. Go deep and ask exactly where the motivation comes from. It's a simple, almost like an onion of decisions you should make. Starting with a why allows you to deeply understand exactly the motivation of a person, allows you to understand the impact and the outcome which you need to achieve, and then reflect on that, trying to exactly understand what process you can take and what do you need to deliver. It could be in UI design, it could be in product design, it could be in user research, you name it. There is a lot of ways to skin this, but ultimately it's really trying to step back. This is an example of the company, of like how do we do it, what we do, why we do what we do. So it really depends where do you apply it, but you should always start with a why, so you get the clarity to then pick the right tool. And like a lot of designers, when they engage with a project team, they are like, oh, so I need to produce 20 different mockups, I need to produce 20 different screens. I'm gonna use this method for research, which is just one method. I'm gonna use this prototyping tool. That's a wrong approach. Forget about pixel pushing. Think about the actual mindset and why do they come for you? What do they desire? What's their agenda? What do they want to achieve as a person who's, let's say, is a stakeholder? But also this can be applied to the users as well. Let's say if you want to figure out the day-to-day journey of your users to map out the experience, well, you probably should ask why they do what they do. They might tell you, it might show you in ethnographic research, and they might walk you through their decision-making process. But if you just capture as is at a face value, it could be that you just scratch the surface. You should definitely dig deeper. You should definitely ask why. So, for example, an immediate example, I had a chat with this person who's performing their tasks. They are a driver, and they just clock in, clock out in a certain way. And, they just show and I said, this is what we do daily. And when I asked why, they were like, they didn't even think about it themselves, but they reflected and said, oh, perhaps it's because the company wants to track time, or perhaps the company wants to track them accountable, or perhaps the manager needs to know about their clocking in, clocking out, and things of that nature. And I was like, okay, interesting. So that's how you as a user motivate yourself to actually do that, because you care about what your manager thinks, what your department thinks, what your company thinks, and that's why you do. That immediately shapes the behavior and tells us exactly why he or she as a human actually acts that way in that scenario. And if you capture enough evidence like that, you can then shape the behavior models or change those behaviors. And maybe the solution is there to make a digital app which allows them to clock in, clock out, but when it tells them in the app, and I'm of course going off tangent and going crazy here, but perhaps that app just says, hey, you're going to make your manager's life easier if you do that on time, clock in, clock out. Crazy idea. But if we know that our users care about that stuff, and that's the why, we can actually then add the implementation and then get ahead. It's as simple as that. Cool. Let's take a quick break. I'm gonna put the BRB scene in a moment, and do let me know in the comments if it resonates with you. Go grab a snack yourself or a drink. We have a few more bits to go through, but thanks so much so far, and I'm gonna be back in just a minute. Cool. And I think I'm back. I think the audio is all mixed up. It's all good. All right. I see that some of you took a break. It was cool. But as you can see on my screen immediately, I have that next thing. And as with everything, the good stuff is really hard to label, and it's super simple. It's almost like it's a mindset, it's a growth mentality, it's a principle, whatever you call it. It's something you can actually apply yourself, and it can become your mantra or a way you approach things, because that's what makes some people stand out from the crowd. So this is called Discipline Equals Freedom. It's 2 books, it's several books. It's about Jocko Willing, who is a SEAL commander. Regardless what he does, regardless if you agree with, the actual act of war, or, the challenges and things of that nature, it doesn't really matter. What matters here, that he has very specific but very simple set of things you can apply and do in your work, let's say, because let's face it, you are not dealing with anything else but dealing with bigger squads, dealing with big massive organization, trying to achieve a goal, to succeed, to quote unquote defeat your enemy of bad UX, let's say, or defeat your enemy of a competitor, virtually, not directly, but you get my drill. Now, the message here, what I drew out of it, and I think it can be applied for anyone, is the discipline equals freedom, but specifically that you as a designer should focus on doing the hard things first. So it's as simple as, let's say, if you have 20 tasks in your day, and a lot of them are kind of like, one could be replying to an email, another could be thinking and replying, another could be setting up sessions, another could be following up, another could be crunching things and synthesizing things, and the last one could be having a challenging conversation with someone who you must have a challenging conversation with, because you know that if you don't, it could bite you in the backside in the long term. Doing that first and I guess finishing it off and actually just ticking out of the list is going to make everything easier, and it's going to unblock you in all the different aspects which you might not think about. It's a mental blockage, because a lot of us have these big challenges we face, but we tend to procrastinate and push them away, and we tend to put them aside and think that with over time it might solve themselves, or we might just be lying to ourselves. Let's be honest, right? And so applying the discipline equals freedom, and it's as simple as just remembering that, hey, if I'm disciplined enough with the things, I can free up my time and I can achieve much more as a UX designer. It's as simple as that. Tackling your most challenging bits in... Oh, I think we have an issue. YouTube doesn't restart video play after the break. Had to close and reopen a video. Oof. Okay, let me just put... Could be just an... I didn't really stop the actual stream, so it could just be maybe your internet issue or app issue. Anyhow, discipline equals freedom is taking ownership of the most serious things in your life first, and then freeing up yourself to focus on everything else, which almost is peripheral. And it's not about being reactive. It's also reflecting and understanding what's, again, in your control, outside your control. What do you need to do right now? And what is, I guess, the hardest thing you should be doing? Because let's face it, the things which we don't want to do is usually the things we should be doing, because our minds as mammals were primed to procrastinate and find the easy way, the shortcut, to focus on something else but that hard bit in the life, So this is ultimately a super principle, and I would recommend you to check the books. At minimum, check the, let's say, Discipline Equals Freedom manual, because it's a business applied type of approach of the lessons learned in the field of, the SEALs and things of that nature. Cool. That's a simple one. Let's jump right into it. And this is almost counterintuitive, but I like the flip sides, because I believe you need to understand a lot of different angles That's why we do UX, right? We need to understand a lot of different aspects to a story to then figure out what exactly is the truth or collect the evidence to move along and action something. Procrastinate more is almost a deviation or maybe evolution of do more. And I don't want to just target this as a do more, because it's not really about that. It's about starting more things than you need to. Like a lot of, let's say, juniors or people around me, they get baffled and say, oh, you do this and you do that. How do you manage your time? How do you do that? How do you do this and that? And all of it is really just that I procrastinate a crap load doing things because I start a lot of different things. The more things you take on, the more things you start off, which you are passionate about, by the way, and which you can afford doing, then you have all the alternatives to procrastinate. For example, if I have 10 different things I could be doing because I love it, and I just don't feel like doing 5 of them, I can just pick something to do out of 5 others. It's as simple as that. And that has to do with your career progression, learning, UX itself. You know, if you don't have, as a top performer, your task list is always going to be busy. You cannot afford to have anything else because you're always going to be super effective at something. And procrastinate more is almost like a principle that if you start a lot of different activities, you're always going to, and super important to note, activities which you are super passionate about and which are important to your goal, whatever the goal is, you're always going to have an option to progress yourself, because picking up where you left off with something and procrastinating with that thing, which is still important, is going to kind of boost you up and allow you to progress and evolve further. It's as simple as that. You know, if you want to do a lot of different things, you could block yourself because you have a decision fatigue, because you're not sure which one you should start. My take is like, start more than you can take on, and then figure out what you actually want to do, what you love doing, and what actually contributes to your efforts. Kind of like, you know, diverge. Then reflect, converge back, laser focus on the things which truly matter. But at first, try to always diverge, try to figure out. And it's almost like a life advice. If, let's say, you know, and if you're super young, you're just trying to get into UX and you're not sure if UX is right for you, explore all the different paths and try to understand if all those different skill sets you have to have is actually right. Try to dip in and kind of like, you know, get a taster of it, then figure out if it's the right one. But you must kind of like, you know, do more and procrastinate more. And then in the end, you're actually going to progress further that way, instead of just being like, oh, I might not do anything at all because if I do one, it could fail. Well, the success results in failing a lot, and your progression is gonna progress more if you learn from failures, your own or other failures. It doesn't really matter, but you're gonna fail a lot, and you just need to be okay with that, because a lot of things are, again, not in your control. A lot of things are in your control. You can learn from it and then actually impact it. Cool. All right. This one is a super simple, but it's a reflection of the things we can do and we cannot do and we shouldn't do. And I labeled this as a no as a default answer. And, you know, it might sound a bit cliche, kind of like, oh, protect your time. You know, we have all limited time. But I just wanted to demonstrate something to you very, very quickly. Here we have 24 blocks. Let's say this represents 24 hours, right? Let's say you sleep for 8 hours, and I'm just going to mark out those using the post-it notes. Oh. Really quickly gonna just do that. So let's say you sleep for 7 hours, something like that. Let's put 7, right? Because let's face it. Let's say you spend maybe 1 hour exercising or walking or something along those lines. Then you have a good stint of, let's say, I don't know, 8-10 hours, whatever your schedule is like, with a 9 to 5. I don't even count what you do between those things, because a lot of it is social activities, a lot of it is meetings, a lot of it is production, right? So let's say this is a good 8 hours block. You probably might do more than that. Then you're going to have some sort of social errands and a lot of other errands to take care of. Like, let's say you might be a parent, you might have other activities you do, maybe taking care of your parents themselves, or maybe you have a spouse, or maybe you, I don't know, you are doing something else, sorting out some sort of bits you must sort out in your day. And then the rest is, let's say, miscellaneous. But ultimately, this would be great, right, if you could actually do that. And let me just add, just to illustrate it even better, like the miscellaneous are probably the ones where you just actually pause admin stuff and travel and logistics and things of that nature. And this might be your day, right, to an extent, let's say. Now, my point with this, that no is a default answer, is to understand that yes, we have a limited amount of time in the day. It might look like this, it might not look like this, but a lot of it is already blocked out for us. If you want to do something new, if you want to do something extra, you probably should consider if there is any space in it, and it's probably not. Like, for example, you should never sacrifice sleep. You should never sacrifice exercise. You might not be able, and probably are not able, to sacrifice your 9-to-5 commitments. You might not be, able to sacrifice essential errands either, and you shouldn't, because otherwise they're not essential errands. They should be in a miscellaneous block. But just imagine you have, I don't know, 2-4 hours of miscellaneous. You might lose 2 of those hours in the commutes, by the way, because if you go back to the office, that could be the case. Maybe right now you sleep in and your hours of sleep extend, but ultimately you're going to be left with maybe 2 hours of flexibility to do, watch Netflix, watch a live stream like this one. You just literally wasted an hour watching me waffle about these principles, right? So you took this block away from yourself, from your day. You might be left with 1 more hour, and let's imagine this is not a weekend, right? What could you do with that hour? You could eat. I didn't even add eating time, so it's probably going to be in a miscellaneous, right? My point here is that if you would want to now, let's say, I don't know, take on a project, improve your portfolio, learn a new skill, go on a social event, watch a webinar, watch a live stream, something which is, you really, really want to do, chances are you're going to need to employ the no. But the more important message here I'm trying to make is that you're going to need to exchange time from the blocks you already employ. So, for example, if you watch Netflix for 1 hour a day, or you watch YouTube for 1 hour a day, which a lot of us do like, and you want to learn something new, you're probably going to need to replace the habits. You're going to need to stop cold doing Netflix on some days at least, or maybe all throughout, and just stop cold, and then add those in, or you're going to need to do something else. But this is a simple, very kind of graphical way to represent, to, let's say, when I coach my clients in habits and lifestyle transformation, endurance, fitness, I always say to them, well, how does your day look like? Let's reflect, and let's say exactly what can you say no to, and what you can actually exchange, because let's face it, you don't have vacuum, you don't have spaces in your day-to-days. And if you are bored, then chances are you need to probably assess it still and hustle more, or try to tie in your goals, or maybe chase different things which you might not be doing right now. But ultimately, majority of us are already filled up. Majorities of our times are going to be like this, for example. I'm probably should change this to the commute, by the way, so it's much clearer, even if right now most of us don't commute. But you're going to soon realize that your time is super precious, because everything is already taken if you don't already. Cool. Now, next one is going to be super, not questionable, I guess, but it could inflame quite a few people. And I'm going to start with this notion that empathy is a good start, but it's definitely not the answer. Now, in UX and product and, customer and marketing and everything in between, a lot of people got drunk on this notion that empathy is the answer. That if you empathize with your users or your colleagues, you're going to arrive at like the best solutions ever, and life is going to be all flowers, and, you're never going to work again in your life. It's just almost like a too good to be true prophecy of like, just do this and everything is going to sort itself out. In reality, let's face it, it's not really that, because empathy is natural to every human being. A lot of people have certain levels of it or demonstrate certain levels of it. A lot of people could do more of it, especially when it comes to empathizing with the users, or who do you deliver the value to so that it results in best outcomes. I definitely agree with that. But it's still not the answer. It's just the action, is just the way to actually understand and feel what your users feel, or feel what your colleague feels, or feel what your, I don't know, boss or colleague or whoever peer feels, so you can actually connect with them and build trust and move together as a cohesive unit, as a team. So it's super important in that regard. But in UX itself, it's only a kindling to your fire, to your actual actions in the UX, in the research. You must apply empathy, of course, but is it really the most important bit? What's on the other spectrum? On the other spectrum, you have the objectivity. Like, let's say if we take something like, you want to highly empathize for individual people, individual needs, then you're going to be super subjective. You're going to be having this isolated view of, okay, this is a person within their realms. They do this day to day. This is the challenges they face. This is what they feel. This is the why. This is behavior, attitudinal aspects, let's say, in research. You're going to understand it almost like in an isolated view. But what's missing here? This is all good if you design just for one person or for one tiny bit of sample of the users, right? What's missing is the objectivity, the opposite side of the spectrum, which states that you should be focusing on like being as low empathy as possible, but addressing non-individual needs, almost like addressing what's most viable, what pays a lot, what makes sense to do because it's logical, not so much emotional or not so much perceivable on that level between empathy and on an objective self. One is super isolated and subjective. Another one is super objective and big scale impact. A lot of businesses are going to run with the objective. A lot of UX designers are going to start with a subjective. Reality is you need to have a good balance between between both of them in anything you do, because otherwise you're gonna be just ruined. You're not gonna have enough focus and drive to actually make impact, or you're gonna change lives one person at a time. Maybe that's what you want to do. Maybe you just want to create experiences for selected individuals, but then it's not really gonna pay. It's not gonna cover your expenses. It's not gonna cover the cost of UX if you just do that. Another side to this, and of course a lot of people might not agree, but I liked what Don Norman just a couple of years ago noted about this. He basically bashed the empathetic design. He bashed that notion that empathy is all you need to produce a good design or good solutions, and I cannot agree more. Now, let me put a bit more insight into this and exactly why this is the case. This is a good example. So what he's stating basically is that we can pretend and do this UX theater that we empathize with our users and we truly understand their needs, or we can actually go ahead and do it. And empathy remotely is not really that empathy which makes and change lives, either on subjective or objective scale. It doesn't really matter. Either in the isolated or big scale impact, it doesn't really matter. What he's saying is really that you can empathize as much as you want. You're not going to arrive at the best conclusions if you don't actually also action that more objective type of planning and activities. For example, in a human-centered design, you're going to need to empathize with being there. A lot of innovation teams in, let's say, consultancies and design teams, they apply these high-level frameworks, ideate, they kind of reflect on themselves and think that this is empathy. Or they hear something or read insights on an article or in a study and they think, oh, I know this. I'm empathetic of that person's challenge, and so I can design them something. In reality, you are not empathetic enough because you still don't know. It's almost like by proxy. What Don Norman, and I'm paraphrasing, of course, he might disagree with how I interpret this, but what he's saying that design researchers, anthropologists, people of all sorts in technology should approach it super deeply, observing day-to-days, running ethnographic research, participating in the challenges the actual people face to then employ empathy. Then you're gonna know what the crap smells like if you've been there with a person who's doing it. Then you're gonna be able to actually reflect and say, okay, I understand enough to help them out, instead of by proxy in a workshop kind of like speculating and being like throwing these random motions and pain points which nobody has but you, perceivably so because someone told you so, or you just read somewhere online that it is like that. That's why empathetic design sucks, because it's not really that what we need. It's a good title, a good label, a good start, but if someone takes it and bastardizes it and applies it to random notions, it doesn't lead us anywhere. Let's face it. You need to be able to actually go deep enough and engage and do the hard work and actually observe things and report them back, facilitate and action it, not just facilitate and action random ideas and be that UX brutalist who just basically comes up with an idea, implements it and see what happens. Empathy is not that. Empathy is not just that you think you understand someone. Empathy is actually having enough skin in the game. And that can only be achieved if you actually go the extra mile and go there. Be with that person, observe them, ask the whys, super shadow them. And when I say super shadow, means be part of that specific culture. You need to embed yourself. That's why ethnographic research in UX and human-centered design is so important and so powerful, because you're then actually are able to understand what people deal with instead of doing so by proxy. Anyways, I'm hammering this message, but this is almost two different messages in one. On one hand, empathy is not enough however you skin it. It's an ingredient, an essential one, but in UX design, it's not the answer. It's not the only answer, if I might correct myself. It's a good thing to add to your decision making, and it's a necessary thing to add, but it's not gonna result in anything good if you don't actually, if you don't actually do the empathy itself as an action instead of just kind of pretending and doing all this UX theater. And another bit is also considering that you need to be pragmatic, objective, subjective, find the medium between the two. Find where you can actually deeply empathize between the things, but also being very, very cognizant of the viability, the feasibility, what's pragmatic, what's practical, what you can actually achieve right now. So what you empathize with that person, let's say, let's bend that empathetic design. Let's just say empathy. What you actually emphasize with that person, you can actually action and provide the meaningful experience in whatever capacity you can. Cool. Awesome. And just to address very late, but the comment from Camille, and he's saying, so being a cherry picker seems to be good after all, according to Procrastinate More. Yes, it is, but you need to have enough cherries. That was a key message in a previous point, that you must kind of like, you between these two, I guess, even, they kind of merge those practical things, but you do need to have enough fruit in the basket. You need to cultivate this garden so that, different day comes, and I think I forgot to mention this, but different day comes, you can take care of different vegetables in your garden, but all of it is gonna grow and flourish. But if you just do beetroot aisle here, it's just not gonna be a garden, right? It's just gonna be one single thing which might not produce the fruit of the labor you seek. Cool. The next one is super, super practical and super important. Let me just check the live stream quality, that everything is good. I think we're running smoothly. If you have any questions, suggestions, you don't agree with me, leave them in the chat. I'm happy to address. I get carried on with these messages and these things because they're really, they're really close to the core. They can break or like make or break you as a UX designer, as a top performer, because if you ignore these things, you might have a blind side and you might just go blind, not realizing that there is so much more around you, and you can, activate those things, those tools, those principles, those fundamentals in a given situation. Like the empathy, let's not get drunk on the label empathy. Let's actually do the empathy, not just like shove it here and there and throw around. Anyhow, I'm gonna get riled up again. Next one is outcomes over output. This is important for any designer. It doesn't matter what you do. You might design brochures, or you might design experiences, or you might design products or services. A lot of designers, especially the ones who develop, have this notion and focus on the outputs. And when I say outputs, is the shipped software, or for us as designers, would be mockups, wireframes, features, and all the random tangible bits, things which we actually craft and we think that pushing these pixels is actually going to result in something meaningful. But in the end, it's not really either being shipped, or it's not being shipped at the state we want, or it's actually just being ignored altogether, or maybe your UX or some sort of design suggestions are just outright being, thrown away. It's almost a recipe for disaster in your own development, because intrinsically you're going to burn out. You're going to be less motivated to actually contribute. Everyone is going to become like an enemy if you focus just on outputs. The team morale is generally going to dwindle, and you're not going to get anywhere as a team, because you're going to be focusing on churning bits left and right instead of reflecting and being deeply understanding of the things. Again, empathy, the whys, things of that nature. So what's the alternative? Well, the alternative is to focus on the outcomes. And you might be like, like outcomes, what do they mean? Well, outcomes is focus. It's very, very different mindset than focusing on the outputs, by the way. It's transitioning from being a production machine as a designer, into being much more cognizant and effective designer. If you want to get more done as a designer, you need to consider the outcomes, what is required for business, for customer, how can you find the overlaps between the two. If you focus on a Venn diagram, of course, focusing more on the actual user circle, but where is that overlap? And this is almost like, how can you change the customer behaviors for the better so that it results in a desired business goal, so that it ticks those two boxes at the same time. Then what the outputs don't really matter. This is where designers, when we focus on outputs alone, on production of the wireframes, on doing research for the sake of doing research, on producing UI assets and wireframes left and right, they have this massive blind spot, because they don't realize how does that connect to the deeper answer. Like, how does that influence and impact what it needs to be achieved? Like, it almost puts them in a box. Like, if you solely focus on the outputs, you're always going to remain a pixel pusher. And this is not in any kind of a derogatory way. It's just in a way that you're not going to have that influence you need to manage the stakeholders, to produce more value than just what your mockups can deliver. You're never going to be able to evolve into, let's say, experience designer or service designer or actual UX designer if you are doing, let's say, now just UI design, or you're doing something else. You need to focus on outcomes and then figure out what the output should be. Because maybe it doesn't even need UX involvement. Maybe UX is going to mess everything up. Maybe UX can advise on some interface options. Maybe there is no interface and no interface is needed. I like, let's say, government.uk, gov.uk approach, where the digital services cover only what's needed. And they're okay with designing, let's say, forms and printouts if necessary, if their users need that. because ultimately it's about the value we deliver, the outcomes we achieve, and everything else is just a mean, it's just a tool. Like how well you craft your UIs and push pixels doesn't really matter that much. In the end, it's just an asset which is gonna age and is gonna need to be redesigned soon enough. So it's almost like reframing that mindset, kind of stepping back and saying, well, it's super important, right? But it has to be meaningful and it has to be tied to the outcome, not the other way around. The book on this subject, and really important one, is Outcomes Over Output by Joshua Seiden, and he's basically outlining this. Pick it up. It's a short book. You can finish it in 40 minutes, I think. It's under an hour. It's really that short, but it's an essential read for any growing designer or someone who wants to influence things and actually work with others meaningfully. Because let's say product, like a lot of product managers are focusing on outcomes. A lot of engineering might be focusing on outcomes. A lot of engineering and design are going to be focusing on outputs in the beginning. But the more you progress in your career, the more influence you have, you're going to have to focus on the outputs itself. One thing, and additional bit to this, is this framework, which I extracted from the book, but it's the social impact program logic model. So it basically states, and it's an interesting take because it reverses and it kind of like reinforces that message, but it states that, let's say, if you want to, let's say there is someone in, let's take an example like Africa. There is water shortage and you need to provide water for your, for let's say the kids there, and so you want a plan to do a well. The typical approach would be to go and assess the resources, then think about the activities, what you can actually do with those resources. Do you have enough funding? Do you have enough donations? Do you have enough pipelines? Do you have enough people, human support? Then figure out what the output should be. Maybe it's like, oh, let's produce 5 different wells. Then see exactly what the outcome of that would be, and then see what the impact is and maybe reflect on it. So this is one way to skin it, right? And this is a typical approach of any project. But if you would want to actually do it well, you would probably want to start and think about the outcomes or even an impact. Like impact to me is something you can reflect on and see exactly if you actually delivered it. But the outcomes you need to set almost like an objective before you start everything. And then everything else can follow. Like this order of this should be adjusted, but ultimately you need to consider outcomes over output. Like if it would be up to me, I would delete output altogether here, because it's not that important. It is important in terms of actually delivering something, but what that is like, we need to think of what outcome do we want to achieve as a design team, as a project team, as a user value team of sorts. And then that would actually reflect, and the impact would probably be much more meaningful and much more appropriate. And another question, could you say a bit more about paper forms in UK? I'm asking because I'm close to disagree. Do paperless approach, which should be a priority, not to mention the data protection archiving purposes. And you're absolutely right. Like paper is a wild example, but I chose it because all of us as designers, we're drunk with the idea that we need to design apps left and right, and UI is the king, like digital product is the king. But in Gov UK scenarios, and I've been working on several different services before, there is users who are older generations, and I guess maybe to unpack it, Gov.uk approach is to design things for all. It could be accessibility, inclusion. There's audience who are not as tech savvy. There are audience who are, let's say, are in aging population. You need to consider where they are. They might not have Wi-Fi at all, which I experienced myself, where a certain user category didn't have no connection to the internet. How would you capture the information from them if you need the government to know something about it? You know what the solution was? The process where a specific person like a postman would go door to door knocking and receiving that information, just like what census would do in like regular scenarios where you have people coming in. There is digital means to do that. But what if you deliver that service and you need an outcome of collecting as big of a sample of information as you can, and you need to capture everyone's input? And what if your users don't have it? You could give them a phone. You can maybe install a Wi-Fi connection or receiver or some sort of beamer or whatever you call it, right? That could be another thing. But you need to consider holistically what would actually improve that and arrive at that conclusion, what the outcome is desired, what's most viable, which is the cheapest option for it to be successful. Of course, at that point, you're not going to arrive at anything ideal, and you shouldn't aim to arrive at anything ideal, because there is no such thing as ideal solution. There is just solution at the given time, being considerate of all the different things and being cognizant of the actual user needs. But if you get my example, there's going to be corner cases which you might need to address, or there might be even a big major use case which you might need to address, where the users just need something else than just a digital mean. And that's why I'm like, throw it away. Like, outputs are important, but don't think just about delivering mockups, wireframes, app designs, style guides, and something to hand over to developer. What's important is what's going to happen next, what happened before, what the desired outcomes is, how are you going to reflect on it, what the measures were, how do you going to assess the success if you arrived at something. And everything else is going to slot in. That's why I just don't get bogged down and kind of like, get drunk on the notion that UX is all about digital design and wireframes and even, let's say, well, I'm not going to put research there, but you know what I mean when I say it's interface, it's the UI, it's the mobile apps for this, app for that. Nobody needs a new app. They need the better ways. Maybe they need some sort of, frictionless process which is automated, so there's less influence, less decision support needed, less interaction from the user. That would be ideal, and this is where we're probably heading eventually. But you get my point, that all those different apps are just tools. It has to be appropriate. It has to be meaningful. Cool. Right. And the last one in this specific session. If you want another session like that, do let me know in the comments if you want a episode 3, part 3, because there's just so much more. A lot of these naturally overlap because they come from the same notion to kind of contribute to the outcome, if you see what I mean, of becoming better UX designer, much more influential UX designer, better experience designer, design leader, basically, because you need to grow. You need to consider a much more holistic picture than kind of just that being like, specific specialist in a case. So do let me know in the comments, in the actual chat, if you want the next part, if you want a part 3 of this, because it's easy to pull up for me. It's not that hard to kind of reflect and just brain dump everything and just kind of give it to you, and for you to kind of go and figure. And I hope this is useful. All right, this next one is super easy, and I had one more, but I'm gonna probably address it in the next session. It's been quite a long one. Anyhow, when in doubt, you exit. What does this mean? Well, this is, to me, has been mind-boggling for years now. And it's not kind of like, bashing other UX designers or other people around me. But what I recognize is that UX and designers, myself included, yourself included, we tend to be very driven in terms of UX for other bits. But we're not so focused to solve our problems, our own growth problems. We tend to think that UX process, be it, whatever process you focus, maybe you use design thinking, design sprints, maybe it's UX by the book, maybe you do double diamond, maybe you use Jesse James Garrett's 5 planes of UX, whatever framework you would use. We tend to be proud and apply that to solve someone else's problem, but we don't really apply that to solve our own problems. I've seen so many cases of designers who struggle to stuff, and I just want to come and just shake them by the shoulders and say, why don't you just UX it? Like, some people are, let's say, they don't know, they're stuck and they don't know how to progress. And I'm like, Separate yourself from that state and reflect. Approach it as a UX designer. Approach it as a researcher. Research yourself. Discover what the real issues are. Define the issue. Problem frame it. Ideate what could be the solution. And then act on it. It's as simple as that. Let's see if I would be... Let's take a random example. I'm stuck in this specific case, and it's a bad combination of, let's say, bad, difficult to manage stakeholders, difficult boss, I don't know what else, like something along those lines, right? We tend to just like be either like, oh, I'm just gonna quit, or I'm just gonna be kind of like suffering until I burn out and things of that nature. Two cases, probably most common cases, right? Or I'm gonna complain, or I'm just gonna be underperforming and chill and see what happens. 4 cases, right? What if there would be a client who comes to you and says, we have these people and we need your employee experience, experience, so you can come in and actually rejig them, because a lot of them are displaying those 4 cases. They might be pre-burnout, they might be about to quit, they might be, carrying it on, or whatever I just even said, I forgot about it. Anyways, those 4 cases, right? Someone comes to you and says, can you redesign something, or can you research and tell us what we should be doing? Maybe it's engagement programs, maybe it's apps, maybe it's some sort of other designs. Could you do it? Of course you could. So why can't you apply the same design principles to reflect and redesign your life? Like this is the case here, because you are on this stream, maybe you're watching playback, chances are you want to improve, chances are you're looking for ideas, principles, fundamentals, you want to grow, right? And you're in a good place, I hope, but this is just a tool which I hope you are taking almost like as one of the action points, because you reflected on yourself, you researched something, you discovered what needs to be done, and now one of those ideas or actions you must take is this live stream, or my channel, or my upcoming book, or maybe articles, or LinkedIn engagement, or this book you read, or this course you're gonna take. Or maybe it's a personal challenge you face somewhere else and you just needed some random advice. I hope this is not, you're not procrastinating on any of those, and instead you are actually reflective of it, and you approach your life designing it, UXing it. If you have any challenges and you feel stuck, the answer is UX. And it's not a magic silver bullet, but you get my drill. Apply the same lens, try to separate yourself, step back, have that moment, like that condor moment, if you remember one of my videos, of true leadership, where in a battlefield everything is exploding and you just step back and you're like, what should I do next? You have that few seconds of actually, freeze, and then immediately you jump because you came up with a plan like a designer, like a true leader of your own self, but also design as a discipline. So try to reflect on it, and always UX it. Doesn't matter what it is. It almost doesn't matter. The beauty of UX is that it's all about human psychology and understanding the needs, the behaviors, the attitudes. You are human, you face challenges, you can apply it. It's as simple as that. So I hope this is useful. I hope you got charged up. I hope you actually took something out of this session. I can see that we're almost 2 hours, 1 hour 38 minutes in. I'm gonna leave a timestamps down below. Do let me know in the comments or in the chat if you want part 3. I already see 1 comment saying yes, and 2 comments. Nice. So 2 is a crowd. That's good. We can do it. Thanks so much for tuning in, and as per usual, I'll see you next time.